Hey everybody, Bailey Smith here from Recaptured Values, and we are going to be going over Recaptured Values 3-in-1 doll pattern. So if you're watching this video and you have no idea what we're talking about, make sure you click the links in the description below. It's on the right hand side. Click the little arrowhead. The description will pop down and you will have a link where you can purchase this pattern so you can follow along with this tutorial. Because our pattern only includes the pattern pieces, and we have this instructional video to show you how to put all 3 garments together. So this 3-in-1 pattern that you get, it's a PDF pattern. You can print it out, you can keep it digital, but you need to print out the pattern pieces. You can use the overhead if you want to, a projector, that works too. But you get 3 patterns in one. They all have the same bodice. They all use the exact same bodice, but the bottom is different, which makes the whole garment different. So you have a short romper, a circle dress, and a pants romper here. You get all 3 patterns included in this here for $10. Alright, so that's the front page of the pattern. This is the second page. This is just who we are as Recaptured Values, myself, my daughter, and my husband. This is a doll rompers and a dress. We created the pattern for makers and mommies who wanted to create beautiful doll clothes for their little ones. That's how it goes. Okay, check out our YouTube. If you're here for this instructional video and you've never checked out our YouTubes, check out all of our YouTube videos. We post a new video every Tuesday going over a tutorial of things that we love, patterns that we love. So check us out. Alright, so for this pattern, it's important to use knit fabric because it's going to be the most forgiving and it's going to be the easiest to pull onto this 34cm MinikAne doll. So these patterns are specifically drafted for the 34cm MinikAne doll. And these are the Spain dolls, the dolls that are manufactured in Spain and sold from either Australia or France. This is just the pattern that we have, so these fit MinikAne perfectly, or any other 34cm doll. If there's one out there, I'm not familiar with that, but this one's specifically for MinikAne. 34cm dolls, it should work. Okay. So it does require a sewing machine. You absolutely have to have a sewing machine, although a serger is optional. I prefer a serger doing the construction of this and then top stitching with a sewing machine. That's just what I prefer. But I'm going to be showing you how to do the bodice and one of the bottoms with a sewing machine only. And then I will finish up doing with everything with the serger and then the sewing machine top stitching. So that's how it goes. Also the rompers, I like to gather with elastic. It's the only way that I have found that I can get the most even gathers, especially on such a tiny garment. That is important. It's not necessarily super important, but I prefer gathering with elastic. I use 1/4 knit elastic. I have tons left over from masks, and so this is what it looks like here on, I've rolled it up. It's just the 1/4 inch knit elastic. If you don't want to use elastic, you can absolutely gather any other way your heart desires, but for this purpose, or for the purpose of this video, I'm going to be showing you how to do it with elastic. If you need to know how to gather another way, if you don't have elastic readily available, search for gathering fabric and you'll find another way. Okay, and then also I like to use snippers or whatever they're called to clip my points when I'm gathering. You can use a marker if you don't want to snip your fabric, you can do that. And pins are optional but recommended because these are tiny pieces of fabric and it's hard to, maneuver. But make sure if you're using your serger to remove your pins. Also with the sewing machine, you're technically supposed to remove your pins or you could break your needle. I don't take that advice. And I have broken needles before, so they're not lying. Okay, but so we also do put this big disclaimer here that for the instructions, you need to check out our YouTube channel. So you're here, you found it, way to go. Okay, the next paper here is page 4, and that tells you that you need to scale this at 100%. So when you print it and you go to your options, you can click actual size, but I just found that if you change it from actual size over to scale and you scale it at 100%, this almost always is going to be correctly 1 inch, because we do have our 1 inch square here that you need to make sure once you print out that this is correct. I would recommend printing this one page out just to make sure that those printer settings get you that correctly, and then print out the pattern so that you're not wasting paper. Okay, so then you're also making sure that you're cutting your pattern pieces on the outermost edge of the box, the black line. So as I said, all of the different styles, all 3 of the styles will have the exact same bodice. So for the bodice, you need front bodice piece. All the pattern pieces explain exactly what you're supposed to do and what you need for what. So this is the front bodice piece. You need to cut it on a fold. It says that on there, and it says where the stretch goes. All of these pattern pieces say that. And the back bodice piece, just a straight rectangle. Front bodice binding. This is the only pattern piece in this whole pattern that does not get cut on a fold, the front binding piece. Then your neck binding and ties piece here, this is cut on a fold. It's a long piece here. This is the longest piece we have in this pattern. So you need all of those pieces. And then if you're doing the short romper, you will need the short romper piece here. You cut 2 of those on the fold, and then you'll need the 2 of the leg cuffs cut on a fold. For the short romper, the pants romper just needs 2 of these cut on a fold because we hem, and I will show you a trick to hemming those later. And then the circle skirt is cut on a double fold, and so you just need 1 of these cut on a double fold. So let's get started. Throughout this entire video, we're going to be doing timestamps listed to show you exactly where to jump to for which style you're doing. But for the purpose of this video, we're going to do the bodice first, so because it's the same for all of them, remember? Alright, so this is what the bodice looks like when it's completed, and I just did this one on a sewing machine just to show you what it looks like. See how it looks like. So there's the bodice, that's what it looks like, and then all I do is just knot these end pieces here, but that's how the bodice looks. This is the front. Put my hand in here so you can see. That's the front. I guess I could use the doll too. Front piece, back piece, and then the ties here. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do it on the sewing machine. We're going to do the bodice on a sewing machine, and then we're going to do the bodice on a serger. So if you're here for the bodice, this is how to do it on a sewing machine, and we will do a timestamp on how to use a serger too. I prefer the serger method, but I will show you how to do it on a sewing machine because I know some people only have a sewing machine. So here we go. Okay, so here we are at the sewing machine, and I use a Singer Stylus 7258. I think that's what it's called. Let me see. Yeah, wait. Yeah, that was correct. Okay, so you're gonna put your front bodice piece right side down, and with the double brush poly, there is a difference in the front. It is the most like shiny side is the front, the most matte side is the back on double brush poly, which is what I'm using here. So you have your front bodice right side down, so the wrong side should be up, and then your front binding piece here, you're going to put it right side down. So your right side should be touching your wrong side here, and you're going to put it like this on your point here. Okay, so I like to go ahead and get it started here underneath my needle, and I'm going to be using a zigzag stitch, which is just a run-of-the-mill zigzag stitch, 5 width by 2 length. I'm going to hold my strings here just to make sure that my fabric doesn't get pushed into the needle plate here. Right, so then I'm back stitch a little bit once I get it going, and then I'll wiggle my fabric once the needle has gone through. So you're going to pull your binding piece over here to the other side, and I like to pull it just slightly past the point here, and then I like to stretch the binding piece down so that it's in line and all my raw edges are matching up here. Okay, let's see if I can scooch you guys just a teeny weeny bit closer. Okay, so I've got my front binding piece stretched down just like this. I'm just making sure that this binding piece is in line with the swoop here. And so I'm going to go ahead and keep zigzag stitching. And I'm just doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. My machine doesn't really like this fabric that much. Back stitch just a little bit, and okay. So then this is what you're left with, and my 1/4 inch turned into a much smaller one, but it's not really going to matter that much. So that is what you're left with. So this is the front piece here. Now that's the front. So what you're going to do, so that was the back. That's what we just sewed the binding piece to. So we're going to flip it over now. So this is the right side of the bodice. And we are going to flip this seam allowance up here, just like this. Basically, you're creating a binding, a faux binding almost. Flip it up here, flip this down like this. I know I used a black fabric, it's kind of hard to tell. But you flip it down and then you flip it over your seam here. So it looks like this when you are done, and it hides the seam allowance. If you guys can see, hopefully you can. It hides the seam allowance in there. And you're going to try to make it to be as even as the back side. What I mean by that is that this side is the same as this side here, because when you sew, you're going to want to catch both sides to make it look as best as a faux binding. Now you're going to make sure, I got it under the presser foot here. I put the presser foot down. I got my strings pulled here. And I'm going to change my settings to a straight stitch, a 3.5 width by 3.5 length. And I'm going to pull my strings and make sure my needle, and I'm just going to do an 1/8 inch top stitch here to top stitch that fold over down. Okay. And then, so once I get it started, that's when I go ahead and do the other side here, like so. And I just make sure that that back side is right, and then I fold it over, and then I wiggle the middle piece here just to make sure that the back and the front are the same. And then I go all the way. I like to cut these pieces off here. All right, so then that's what you're left with there. That's what it looks like when you're done. And then you have this beautiful faux, or technically it's not necessarily faux, it's a binding. So that's how you do it with sewing machine. And then you will put the bodice right side up, and the back bodice you will open up and put right side down. And now you will change your settings back to a zigzag, and you will zigzag the side seams here, here, and here. So again, I like to just pull on the strings here when I get started, just to make sure that I don't push my fabric in. Back stitch and go. Back stitch. Alright. Got my side seams sewn up here, and what I'm going to do now is match up my side seams and then go ahead and mark a front piece. Mark my front piece, middle point, and my back piece, middle point. And then I'm also going to do it on the top side. So this is the top, obviously. And I'm also going to do it right here too, because that's where I'm going to make sure that my binding is matching up. So I've got my binding, or my bodice is now right side out. So my seams are still on the outside. And now I'm going to take this huge long piece and I'm going to put it right side down on the wrong side here. First, when you cut it, you need to mark that point too. Fold your binding in half, which you've cut it on a fold, so it should already be if you've not unfolded it. And then just snip a point here. That's the point that you're going to match up to the point that you just cut. And so right side down onto the wrong side of the bodice. Match up those points. And I'm going to use a pin for this one. I'm going to use a couple pins actually. And so pretty much you're just pinning this all the way around the bodice here, or yeah, the bodice top. You're just pinning it all the way around the bodice top. So that when you go to zigzag stitch in a minute, it'll be really easy to do. And so you're just making sure all your raw edges are matching up. So then you're going to start right here, which is the top of the bodice and the binding strip here. So put that underneath your needle here. Make sure your threads are out of the way. And pull this up. And just make sure all your raw edges are matching up. So again, you make sure you're set at a zigzag stitch, 5 width by 2 length. And so I'm just going to get started. Back stitch. I'm going to remove my needles as we go. 1/4 inch seam allowance. Mine's going to look a little bit less than that because my machine is not really working as I would like. Something about black thread just makes your machine go crazy. I don't know what it is. It like changes your tensions and everything, even on a serger. And so I'm just going all the way around until I get to the other side of the bodice. So I just went all the way around the back piece, and then now I'm on to the almost to the back side, or to the other side of the bodice piece. That front little pointy there. Okay, so that's all you have to do. With the serger, I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'll go all the way down the strap as opposed to just stopping right there. But for this, that's all you need. And I'm just going to snip these little end pieces here. And of course, you do need a back stitch. I didn't say that, but I did it, so. With a right side out, to make sure that your garment is right side out, which is this bodice right side out now. Exactly like we did the front binding piece, you are now going to make sure that that seam allowance is flipped up because that's going to be inside the binding. So make sure that seam allowance is flipped up. Fold your binding over and then fold it. So you're going to fold it in half and then fold it again over. And then you'll wiggle it just a little bit to make sure that it is lined up with the back. Alright, and I like to go ahead and just pin all around. Just makes it easier for me to pin. So as you can see, what I'm doing is I'm kind of making the seam allowance a little bit more on the back and then flipping this down like this. See that? And then you flip over here to hide that seam allowance and you pin it in place. So then you pin it in place and you'll stretch it as you go. Alright, so I'm going to do this side the exact same way. It's a little time consuming, but it looks really cute when you're done. I'm sure there may be an easier way to do this, but I found that this binding works really well because stretching onto and off of the doll, the binding is going to be a lot easier to provide for longer wear of these garments because the bands will get stretched out really quick if you do a band. So the binding helps to prevent super stretching since you're likely your kids are going to be taking these on and off of the dolls. So what you're going to do is, now I got the strap here. I like to start on this one and then go around. This is this strap is the one I like to start with. So you're going to make sure you fold these, fold them to the middle equally, like so, like this. There's a bunch of fuzz on there, but you fold it like that, and then you fold it like this. You fold it in half. And so you're going to be stitching with a straight stitch. So change your settings over to a straight stitch. I do 3.5 width by 3.5 length. And then I just like to go ahead and make sure that I got my needle where I want it to go. So I'm going to use my hand wheel here just to make sure that I got my needle where I want it to go. And so I've already got the needle in the fabric there. And I'm just going to pull the strap just slightly, not stretching it, just pulling it enough to where I can make sure that it's still folded up. So I'm going to go ahead and when I get started, I'm going to make sure I hold my strings tight. And then I am doing about an 1/8 inch top stitch from the edge here just to make sure that I'm top stitching this fold close. And then you just make sure that it's staying folded properly. And we're to the first point here. And so I'm going to do, I just like to hold it each point. And then make sure that my binding is still folded over that seam allowance, because you want to hide your stitching from the seam allowance that you did. Alright, next pin. Next pin. Stitch and pull it out. Snip your strings and then flip your bodice. There you go. There's the bodice piece here. And then what I like to do is I just like to make sure that my straps are the same length here, just because sometimes stretching or overstretching makes them a little different. And so you just do that just to make sure. And mine are just a tiny bit different, so I'm going to snip the longer one to make it a tiny bit shorter. Alright, and then what I like to do is just tie a knot at the end of the string here. It's the easiest way to finish this, in my opinion. Just tie a knot, pull it as close to the edge as possible, and there's the end of that. You can absolutely do a straight stitch if you want to omit the knot here. I just find the knots easy because it helps the neckties stay on the doll neck. So that's how you do the bodice on a sewing machine, and we are about to do the bodice on the serger and then top stitch with the sewing machine, so stay tuned for that. Okay, so here's how you construct the bodice on the serger and the sewing machine. I'm going to be using white thread on black fabric, which is typically frowned upon, but I'm going to show you because I want you guys to be able to see the thread. Alright, so the exact same thing, bodice right side down. So this is the wrong side of the bodice. This is the front binding piece, and so I'm going to make sure it is right side down. So you have right side to wrong side here. And I'm just going to match it up on my point here, right here. I put it a little bit past the point just because I feel like it's the best way to do it. You don't have to do that, but I do. So I'm going to make sure my blade's up, or my knife, whatever you want to call it, is up. And then I get started. And I'm doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so once I get it underneath there and caught in the seam, or in the needle, I do the exact same thing if you've watched the first one. I've pulled the binding across to the other point, and I've then stretched it down so that my raw edges are together here. And I also stretched it into a straight line, which it will curve up in just a moment. It's just easier to serge on a straight line, of course. Alright, so snip my tail. So that's what it looks like. So we're going to flip this over so that the bodice now, this is the right side of the bodice. We're going to push this seam allowance up. Make sure that it's flipped up underneath the binding. Let me grab the needles. So what you're going to do is make sure your binding or your seam allowance is flipped up. That's about how it's going to look. So I got about that much folded underneath it. And then I'm going to fold this part down. Then fold it over so that they match up. And I didn't pin on the sewing machine one but I'm pinning this one just because I did sew it in a straight line, but that's how it's going to look when it's done. And you're just top stitching right here along this folded edge just to top stitch it down. So we're going to go over to the sewing machine and do that. Alright, so we're at the sewing machine. I've got my straight stitch set at 3.5 by 3.5, 3.5 width by 3.5 length. So I'm going to put this right here, put it where I want it to go, make sure that my needle is going to land where I want it to land with the hand wheel here, and see, mine was not where I wanted it to go. Alright, so I got my needle exactly where I want it to go, and I'm going to remove that pin and just sew on down. And so that's what it's going to look like. Ooh. That's what it looks like when it's top stitched. So now we're going to do the back binding. We're going to put the back bodice and then do the back and necktie binding. And as you can see, it's so much quicker, and I'm just apparently more comfortable using my serger to do this. It's just a little bit more difficult to keep everything from not being eaten from your sewing machine. You guys can hear my daughter singing Itsy Bitsy Spider in the background. She is supposed to be taking a nap. Okay, so this is the front side of the bodice. This is the right side of the bodice. And this is the right side down. So right sides together. Back bodice here. And I'm going to be sewing or serging the side seams here. Again, I showed you how to do it on the sewing machine. So this is how I do it on the serger. So I'm going to serge down the edge here. And I'm going to serge down the edge here. I would definitely recommend using a thread that matches your garment if you're using a serger. Just preference there. So for your back binding piece, which is all that's left, you are going to snip it. So it's folded together. This is a fold of it here. That's actually a really long piece. I'm just going to snip a point here in the middle. And with my bodice here, this is the bottom side of the bodice. I'm matching up my side seams here, and I'm going to snip a piece in the front. This will help me later when I'm attaching whatever bottom to this bodice. And then also I'm going to snip the top bodice here. Okay. So now what I'm going to do, this is the bodice is inside out. And now I'm going to open up this piece here, the binding piece, and that part that I snipped, I'm going to match up right side down, right side of the binding to the wrong side of the bodice. I'm going to just match up that point. I found that gives me the most even piece here. And so then I'm just going to pin this to the top of the bodice here. Remember, the bodice is inside out and this binding piece is right side down. And I'm just going to pin here just to kind of keep everything together. I'm just pinning. Alright, one more pin. You're just evenly stretching it out around the and pinning it to the bodice here. So that's what it looks like when it's pinned on. That's what it looks like when it's pinned on. So I'm going to start on this side so that it can go all the way around the back. I like to start on the actual strap when I serge. It just makes it easier for me, and so I'm just going to go ahead and serge. 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm barely cutting anything off. Okay, so here's when it gets important to make sure that your bodice is exactly how you want it, so when it goes under the knife, it's going to stay that way. So I remove the first pin here, and remove this pin. And I'm just making sure that my bodice is going around. And then if your tension was a little off, that's why I cut my tails a little longer, so that on the straps I can pull it just a little bit and get some more slack so that those straps aren't super tight with the tension, and that my thread's not going to disappear when I do that. Okay, so now I can clip my tails a little bit shorter since I've already used the slack I wanted to use. And so here is what you're left with. This is the back of the bodice here. This is the seam allowance we just did, and here is the front of the bodice. And so that's what it looks like now that we've sewed the binding strip. And so now you're just gonna pin it again, pin everything with the binding strip down, seam allowance up, flipped up, and again it's about, so this is going to be half. I'll go ahead and pin this too. Half. And fold. And so that's what you're doing all around this. You're just pinning, folding it, and folding it one more time, just to sandwich that seam in there. I actually don't pin it this much, but for the purpose of this video, it's probably going to be necessary for you to. Alright, I'm just going to pin that much for now. So we're going to go over to the sewing machine and get this top stitch. Alright, so exact same setting, straight stitch, 3.5 width by 3.5 length. And I'm just going to start on, this is the bodice, and I'm starting on this strap here, which is the right side. If I'm holding the bodice and I'm looking at the bodice, this is the right strap. And the bodice is right side out here. This is the right side of the bodice and the straps. So I'm going to go ahead and just make sure and back stitch a little bit. Okay. And I'm doing it about an 1/8 inch seam allowance here. Not seam allowance, technically seam allowance, but about an 1/8 inch top stitch here. Just making sure that I'm catching both sides, both folded edges here. This is the part where you need to make sure that your seam allowance is covered, especially since I did mine in white, because if you don't cover it, you will be able to see it. Alright, so then just make sure that it's covered. Alright, and I'm just going around in the circle here. And this is what I meant by I really don't pin it that much. I just make sure that my seam allowance is flipped up, and then I just go with the flow. Just going all the way around the bodice here. Again, just making sure that everything is exactly how I want it. It does take a little bit of practice to perfect binding. I just find it works better. Binding is definitely not my favorite thing to do, but for this particular garment, I feel like it's important to do binding. Like I said earlier, it's just easier for, it doesn't have as much wear and tear pulling a garment on and off a doll. Because these little things are tricky to put on, because they don't bend like babies do. They're little baby dolls, so they're hard plastic, and so they're not going to be as easy to dress, even though a baby's not really that easy to dress either. Okay, last piece, all the way down the strap here. Make sure that your strap is folded. Alright, almost done. Back stitch. All right, and so here, well, I got one pin left. Here's the bodice with it sewn. Nice. Okay, so now let's go to the bottoms. So here is the sewn bodice that we did, and here is the serged bodice that we did, just to give you an example, they both look great. Now this one just has some strings here, but that's how they look. Sewn, serged, fairly similar, get the same result. I just prefer the other one, it's faster. So here is the piece for the dress. I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to cut. So this is the dress piece here. Check the description if you're not doing the dress, if you're doing another piece, and follow the timestamp for that. This is for the dress. So this is the dress piece here, and what you're gonna do is you're gonna fold your fabric this way. This is a fold, and then you're gonna fold your fabric this way. Alright, so then here's a fold, and then here's a fold. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna put your pattern piece on here just like this. And then I like to use weights. These are just washers covered up with washi tape. And then you're going to cut here, this curve right here. And then you're gonna cut this curve right here. And so what I did, I put it on a fold, fold. So then you're gonna cut this curve and this curve. You're not cutting any of these lines here. And then you are left with a beautiful skirt. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna make sure that it goes like this, with the vertical down, like this. This is how the skirt is going to lay here. Okay, so that is the dress, and what you will do, the dress is the most simple one here. Bodice is right side out, and we are gonna put the skirt after we make some points. I need my snippers, and so I'm gonna make sure that I cut an even piece here. Snip one side, boom, one side, boom, and I'm just gonna make 2 points here. I typically do 4. You can do 4, which would mean you'd snip here at the front and the back too. What I'm gonna do is, I like that flower, so I'm gonna make that flower the front piece. So here's the skirt. I'm putting the skirt on the outside of the bodice. The bodice was right side out. So now the skirt is wrong side out. And I'm pinning it to the bodice here. So my bodice is now upside down. And then I'm going to serge that circle here. So there's my straps for my bodice, as you can see. So my bodice was right side out. My skirt is wrong side out. So my right sides are together now. And then I'm just going to serge all around there. If you don't have a serger, you can use your sewing machine and just do a zigzag stitch all around there. So let's go do that. So raw edges together. I'm just going to make sure that my points are in here. And I'm going to sew around the circle. If you need a quarter, you can absolutely do that. I just did 2 points, just because I'm used to doing it. Just make sure you're removing your needles as you go. Your pins, whatever you call them. So this by far is the easiest one to do. And then I use this thing to put my tail back in. So then there you go, and you just flip it out like this. And then there's a cute little dress. Okay, so for the pants romper, all you're gonna need is using the pants pattern piece, which is this one. You just need to cut 2 of these on the fold, which it says. So I've done that. Got this cute little pinstripe here. Right side up. Right side down. And I'm gonna use a serger. You can use a sewing machine, like I said. But I'm just gonna serge this edge here. And then we're gonna hem here before we close it. It's just easier so you don't have to hem these tiny little leg holes. So let's go to the serge. Okay, so we're just gonna serge down the edge here. Again, if you don't have a serger, zigzag stitch was perfectly fine. Just making sure your raw edges are together. I always use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm just doing the side seams here. I'm just going to clip my tails here. Not too short, but short enough so they're not in the way. Alright, so then what you're going to do is you're going to open these up like so. And then you're going to flip them and hem them on a flat rather than in the round, just because it's so much easier to hem these flat than round. So let's go to the sewing machine. Okay, so at the sewing machine, we're going to use a zigzag stitch at 5 width and 2 length. And I'm just going to flip these up about 1/2 inch. I eyeball it. You can measure if you want to. I just do about 1/2 inch hem here. And I'm going to make sure my strings are out of the way, my threads. And I'm going to pull these, get started, back stitch a little bit, and then go on ahead. Just making sure that it is an even hem here. Alright. So there you go. And so now the pants are hemmed, and we're going to go back to the serger to finish this. Alright, so back at the serger, you're going to make sure that your side seams are together. This is the first side seams that we serged together. And you're going to go to the curve in the middle here. And so for this part here, you put your legs, this is a leg cuff here, a leg piece. I've got it right sides together. Put it under my knife here, and then I'm going to show you a trick. Go just enough to where it goes into the fabric. Alright, so the needle has gone into the fabric and is in the up position. I've undone my presser foot, lifted my presser foot, and I'm going to pull my strings, and then I'm going to pull them underneath my knife here. And then that'll close off that seam for me. And then I'm just going to go around the pants here. Going around the curve. And then this one here, I will tuck back in. Just tuck that back in there. And then when you flip these pants out, before we gather them, I will show you what that looks like. So then that's what these little pants look like when they're done. And then you just gather it. So to do the gathers with elastic, what you need to do is we're going to grab a bodice that we already have done here, and you're going to measure the bodice piece here, your elastic, because you want it to be about the same size as your bodice. So I just do this, and then I cut it about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch bigger than the bodice. And then so that's going to be my elastic piece here to gather my bottom. You do the same thing for the shorts as you would the pants here. Alright, so then you're going to close your elastic into a circle like this. So let's go to the sewing machine, and then I'll show you how to add the elastic to the romper to gather, and then we'll ultimately attach the bodice to the bottoms. Okay, so here we are at the sewing machine. We're going to do a zigzag stitch to close this elastic shut. I'm just going to go ahead and put it under here, and I'm going to remove my pin very carefully so that I don't pull the elastic out. Zigzag stitch, and then back stitch over, and I might do another one. Okay, so then you've got your elastic closed. You're just going to need to snip all these little extra points here. So there's your elastic for your romper. And so I'm just going to use a marker, and this is what I meant by needing a marker for your points. I'm going to make 4 equal points here. I'm going to use the back seam where I did my elastic here, right there, and put those 2 points together and do 2 side pieces here. All right, so that's that. So for the romper piece, these are the pants we just did. So we're gonna fold the side seams together so that we get a even point for the front and the back here. So then we're gonna use the side seams as 2 points, and we're gonna use this front snip that we just did and the back snip that we just did. All right, so you're gonna need 4 pins. All right, so you're gonna put the elastic, you're gonna make sure your point that you marked, you can see, and you're putting it on the inside of the garment here. So on the wrong side, the elastic needs to be attached to the wrong side here. If you've watched our tutorials for the Napa romper, or the bubble hack that we do, this is exactly the same step. It's just a much tiny scale. And you're just going around matching up your points. And if you have watched those videos, you may know that I'm doing this just a tiny bit differently. It's exactly the same, but instead of turning my garment wrong side out to do this, I'm just leaving my garment right side out because I've learned that it's a lot easier to sew this elastic on in a round rather than trying to do it the other way. All right, pick a point, any point, turn your settings to a straight stitch, and you want it the longest that your machine will let it go. So mine goes up to 4.8 length. So once I got that needle in there and I've done it a few times, that's when I'll go ahead and start stretching my fabric out. So I'm just gonna stretch it point by point here, stretch the elastic out so that it lays flat onto the fabric, and then just start doing this stitch. Make sure you're holding your points because it will go back because it's elastic. All right, so I'm at my next point, and I'll just pull this one back like this. Make it flat. And I'm leaving a 1/4 inch above the elastic. I do that because I like to serge that part off when I attach the bodice to the bottoms. And so keep on going around here. And then if you ever get to a point where it's not laying all the way flat, you have a fold, pull it, let it go a little bit and bunch up the fabric, and then pull it again, and then you'll have even bunches underneath. All right, we're on our last piece here. Be careful not to stab yourself too, because these pins are poking out. Last stretch, and I like to go over just a little bit where I went out, and then what you get is a perfectly gathered waist here that no matter how many times you go over it, it's not coming ungathered. That's what I like about it. I feel like when you gather using the straight stitches or whatever, I feel like your gathers move on you and then you have uneven gathers. I may not understand it all the way, but this way I understand. So I'm showing you guys this. Hopefully it's life-changing. Right, so then that's that. And you'll gather the shorts the exact same way. Okay, so then we got our bodice here, which is right side out, and we are gonna put our bottoms wrong side out and flip them out. Come on, these tiny little leg holes. All right, good enough. Okay, so what you're gonna do, I like to put this seam that we did in the back here. I like to go ahead and make sure, unfold this so you guys can see exactly what I'm doing. Inside of the bottom. And I like to put, this is gonna go inside the hole here. So my bodice is gonna go inside. So I'm gonna pull it through. So put it in the hole here, like this. I'm holding the side seams here to make sure that everything's out of the way. All right, so I'm gonna match up my point here, and raw edges are gonna meet. So I got my raw edges here together, and that's what you're gonna serge off when you attach it. Sorry. So pinning it. Now this way I'm gonna 1/4 it. I'm gonna just do halves here actually. And so I'm just pinning it here, matching up my bodice, which is right side out, and my pants, which is wrong side out. Alright, and so there it goes. And now I'm just going to serge around in here, making sure my straps are out of the way, and I'm just going to serge around or zigzag stitch around and close it off. So let's go do that. Okay, so here at the serger, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that's lined up. And for this one, I actually do not like sewing in the round, just because I like to be able to see. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to put, make sure you guys can see it. I got my serger right here. I'm putting my knife right up against the elastic. I'm not going to cut the elastic. I'm going to cut right up against the elastic. So make sure that you're doing that and you're only cutting off the excess and not the actual elastic. And so I'm going to go ahead and go around and just make sure you do not serge over your pins, because that would be make sure you're removing your pins as you go around, and make sure that nothing's bunching up as you're going around the. I'm trying to hold this down as best as possible for you guys. Alright, last piece here. Making sure all my raw edges are still matching up. Alright, I'm going over the spot where I started, and I'm just tucking it back in to the seam. Tucking that back in. And then when you pull the bodice out, you will then flip it all the way right side out, and then there's your little pants romper there. That's what that looks like. So now let's do the shorts. Okay, so for the short romper, you need 2 cuffs and 1 front, 1 back of the exact same piece. So you just need one of those pieces cut. So you're gonna put it right side up, right side down, and match up your side seams. Side seam, side seam, side seam. Okay. Serge down the edge here. Of course, if you don't have a serger, zigzag stitch works. I say that over and over again because that's the #1 question that we get asked. So now you can't say you didn't know. Side seams, then the crotch seam here. Pay no attention to my dog barking. Of course, he never barks, except for the video. Alright, so then that's that. That's done. You did side seams and the crotch seam. And so now you're going to do a cuff. And so what I like to do is the cuff's folded here. This is the stretch of the cuff. Cuff fold. Then you fold it again this way. And then you serge or zigzag stitch right here. I like to start with the folded edge into the serger first. Then I'm going to do the other one the exact same way here. Alright, cut, cut, cut. Alright, and then I'm going to make a snip point here, here, and here. Before I flip it out, I find that really easy to do because you know that's the even point there and there. So then you flip your cuff out like so. And there's one cuff. And there's 2 cuffs. And then you're going to pin your cuffs to your leg holes of your romper. And so I'm going to turn my romper right side out. And then I'm going to go to the crotch seam here. And I'm going to pin the cuff seam to the crotch seam here. I like to apply my cuffs on the outside. Just personal reference. Personal preference. Alright, and then match up your other side over here. Okay, and then what you're going to do is you're going to serge or zigzag stitch in the round here. Move that out of the way. Alright, and then just make sure that you're not sewing your needle, serging your needle. Just going around here, making sure that the 2 raw edges of my cuff, the 1 raw edge of my romper are all lined up, exactly like I sew the cuffs on a bummy. Move my needle. This one will require just a teeny tiny bit more stretching than normal, just because it's such a tiny cuff. But it doesn't normally overstretch, so don't be worried about that unless you're going super crazy. And go over where you started, snip it, tuck it back in. Then flip your cuff out. And there you go, that's a cuff. And so we're doing the exact same thing on the other side, but a little bit faster because it's exactly the same. Alright, tucking that in. And then we've got our cuffs on, and then you're just gonna do the exact same thing as far as the elastic gathering as the pants romper. I'll show you one more time really quick, just for the people who are watching just this part for the shorts. But then that's what it looks like with the cuffs for the shorts. Hold on one second. With the cuffs for the shorts on, that's what it looks like on the bottom there. And so now we're gonna gather. Okay, so again, for anybody who didn't see how I find the elastic measurement, what I do is I will just lay it on the bodice, make sure the bodice has no folds underneath it. Lay it on the bodice, and you want to do 2 times the bodice plus about 3/4 of an inch. And then you will just pin it and make the bodice, or make the elastic into a circle. And you will need to go to the sewing machine to close your elastic off, and then you will need to gather this on the sewing machine. So let's go over to the sewing machine for this last step. Okay, all my lovely people, we are almost done. Zigzag stitch 5 width by 2 length. Put the piece under there, pull your pin very gently. Go over that spot, and then back stitch over it, and then maybe a little bit more forward, just to make sure that it closes all the way. Snip all your points, and that's just to enclose your elastic. One more piece there. So now your elastic is closed, and you need to make 4 equal points on your elastic so that you can match them up and easily gather. And like I said in the beginning of this, you do not have to use elastic. If you know how to gather, or you're comfortable gathering in any other way, absolutely do that. Gathering is just my life-saving thing I found, because I couldn't gather for the life of me. And these, literally every time I do anything with gathers and I gather this way, the #1 question I am asked is, how did you gather so perfectly? Ta-da! Elastic. So that's why I use it. it's just kind of foolproof in my opinion. Okay, so you're gonna need to make 4 equal points on your romper shorts. So make sure that your edges are matched up, and then you just fold side seam, and snip the front and the back here. And I'm leaving the romper right side out, but I'm gonna pin the elastic. Let me grab some more pins. Pinning the elastic, oop, Lord, don't drop the pins, to the inside of the garment. So to the wrong side. So I'm gonna open this up. And I'm gonna make sure that my pin marks are where I can see them. And I'm gonna put this right here. Pin it. This is a little tricky. And just go around to make sure that you are matching up a point per quarter mark or seam that you use. Keep on going around. We're almost done. Alright, and then you're going to go and do the last one here. Alright, and then you're going to change your settings to a straight stitch. The longest it will go, my machine will only go to 4.8 length, and it is a 3.5 width. I don't think I've ever changed my width of my straight stitch. So I'm going to sit this in here, and I'm going to just go ahead and put my needle through a few times. I do that because when I start pulling this, if you haven't put that needle through a few times, it will just yank right underneath the, right out from under the press foot. So I'm gonna go ahead and just pull the elastic straight so that it lays flat with the fabric. I'm leaving a 1/4 inch of fabric above my elastic because that is what I like to serge off. If you're using a sewing machine, you don't have to leave that on there. But if you do, just cut that off when you're done sewing it on. So, because I leave that up there for the serger. So then I just go around point by point, stretching it equally as I go. Almost done. I don't really backstitch in this because I'm pretty sure it's not going anywhere. And this is really just to get the elastic onto the garment. And because I serge when I'm done, it's pretty secured. It's not coming off. But to do this on a sewing machine, all you would do is zigzag stitch over the elastic. So exactly like we apply it to the garment, right side out, bodice inside the hole here, and then you would zigzag stitch onto the elastic all the way around, and then you just trim off this extra piece here. I like to do the serger, so I'm going to go to the serger and do it. Okay, so I've got my bottoms wrong side out, and I've got my bodice right side out, and I am going to put my bodice inside the bottoms just like this. So the bodice is upside down, right side out, going into the romper bottom, just to show you guys. So I'm going to put it in like this, and so that the raw edge of the bottom of the bodice is now touching this part. And so I'm going to pin around like this. Right, and so I'm not going to go ahead and do quarters. You can. I'm not going to do it because it's a very small opening. And I'm just going to make sure my knife is up. And I am just barely, I got my knife right against my elastic. So I'm not cutting my elastic. I'm just cutting the excess off of the elastic. And then just make sure that you're pulling your pins out as you go. Of course, you don't want to serge over your pins. make sure everything's still lined up. Last pin here. Almost done. And then I'm just going to tuck this back into the seam. Alright, and so that's what the inside of the garment looks like. And then when you flip it, there's the romper. So let's go see all 3 pieces. So here is the short bubble. Let me make sure everything's even on the inside here so that it looks cute, laying flat. Bubble. Short bubble. Dress. And pants romper. So those are all 3 pieces there. And that's how you use this pattern. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, make sure you comment them down below. And we will be happy to answer those. And hope you love this tutorial. Hope you love this pattern. And happy making, guys.